Introduction. Welcome to the last analog childhood. If you were a child in the 1970s, your continued existence today is, in some quiet and statistically improbable way, a minor miracle. Not the dramatic headline-making kind of miracle, no choirs of angels or unexplained lights in the sky, but the quieter variety, the kind that reveals itself only when viewed through the lens of modern parenting standards, the kind that becomes apparent when you casually mention at the dinner table in 2026 that you once spent 8 uninterrupted hours riding your bike across town without a helmet, a phone, or any adult having the faintest idea where you were. You will notice the room go still. Because if you grew up in that era, you likely survived at least 3 daily activities that would now trigger a cascade of concerned texts, GPS pings, and possibly a neighborhood-wide alert system. You rode in the back of pickup trucks, not as a secured passenger, but as cargo with opinions. You drank from garden hoses, long, sun-baked tubes of rubber and mystery, without ever once pausing to question what exactly had been marinating inside them since the Eisenhower administration. You left the house in the morning with a vague directive, go outside and play, and you did not return until the sky began to dim or your name was shouted into the evening air like a summons from a distant authority. And somehow, improbably, you made it back. This was not considered unusual. This was Tuesday. Parenting in the 1970s operated on a philosophy so elegantly simple, it bordered on reckless minimalism. If the child returns home by dark and is not visibly leaking anything critical, the system is working. There were no apps to track your location, no helmets mandated by law, no laminated emergency contact cards clipped to your shoelaces. There was instead a kind of ambient trust, misplaced perhaps, but deeply embedded, that children would figure things out, or at the very least survive their attempts. The world itself seemed designed by individuals who had never once attended a safety briefing and would have resented the suggestion. Playgrounds were constructed from materials that implied performance and indifference, steel that burned in the sun, concrete that did not forgive, and swings that reached velocities best described as educational. Lawn darts descended from the sky with quiet menace of medieval weaponry, marketed somehow as a wholesome family activity. Slip and slides introduced children to the fundamental principles of momentum, friction, and spinal misalignment in a single afternoon. Automobiles were less vehicles and more rolling declarations of faith. Seatbelts existed in theory, tucked awkwardly between seats like a polite suggestion. Children roamed freely in the back, occasionally settling into the rear window shelf like sunbathing house cats, entirely unconcerned with the concepts like impact zones or basic physics. Meanwhile, the adults smoked. They smoked with a level of commitment that now feels almost ceremonial. They smoked in airplanes, as though altitude improved the flavor. They smoked in hospitals, in waiting rooms, in grocery stores, flicking ashes with the casual confidence of people who had collectively agreed that this was fine. Teachers retreated into lounges, dense with smoke thick enough to qualify as a separate climate system. Parents lit cigarettes in sealed station wagon windows rolled up. Children quietly absorbed a fog of secondhand Winston like it was just another atmospheric condition. No one called it exposure. It was simply the air. Doctors appeared in television commercials endorsing cigarette brands with the reassuring tone of men who had clearly never met the future. Meanwhile, children, in a remarkable bit of cultural symmetry, crafted ashtrays for those same adults every year in pottery class, small lopsided offerings to a habit no one had yet questioned. And yet, this is where the story resists becoming a cautionary tale. For all its hazards, blind spots, and astonishingly casual relationships with risk, there was something undeniably expansive about childhood in that era. Children inhabited the physical world with a kind of authority that now feels almost mythological. They knew their environment not as a set of coordinates, but as a lived landscape. Every creek had a personality. Every vacant lot was a frontier. Drainage ditches became racetracks, shortcuts, or battlegrounds, depending on the day. Bicycles were not recreational equipment. They were instruments of autonomy, extending a child's world outward in widening circles of independence. A cardboard box was never just a box. It was a spaceship, a fort, a time machine, whatever the afternoon required. A stick was the most versatile tool ever discovered, equally capable of becoming a sword, a rifle, a fishing pole, or an object of intense philosophical significance during moments of boredom. And boredom itself now treated like a development developmental emergency was simply part of the ecosystem. It was the starting point of invention, negotiation, argument, and discovery. Children solved problems not because they were guided through structured exercises, but because there was no one immediately available to solve these problems for them. Supervision existed, but it was distant, ambient, and largely symbolic. The 1970s child belonged partly to their family, partly to their neighborhood, and partly to circumstance itself. There was a shared understanding, unspoken but widely accepted, that children would roam, experiment, fail, recover, occasionally return home with stories that begin with, "So we probably shouldn't have." This book is not an attempt to declare the era superior. It wasn't. The decade normalized a range of practices that modern society has quite correctly left behind. Leaded gasoline, casual corporal punishment, routine drunk driving, environmental neglect, and a parenting style that sometimes drifted past independence into something resembling neglect with a firm handshake. But it also produced something harder to quantify and easier to overlook. Children who were resilient, not because they were protected from difficulty, but because they encountered it regularly and they survived it. Children who were imaginative, not because they were given curated experiences, but because they had invented them. Children who understood risk, not as an abstract concept explained by adults, but as a lived reality negotiated in real time. This book lives in that tension. It is about roller skates on uneven pavement and the quiet authority of wood-paneled room. It is about beanbag chairs that swallowed you whole and beaded curtains that announced your arrival like theatrical props. It is about station wagons with rear-facing seats, where eye contact with trailing drivers become an unspoken social experiment, and televisions that offered exactly 3 channels, each one equally capable of disappointment. It's about the chemical sweetness of mimeograph paper in school hallways and the unmistakable percussion of screen doors slamming against summer evening. It's about the particular freedom of riding a bike until the light began to fade. Hearing the distant call of your name and recognizing, not resenting, that it was the boundary. Don't come back until dinner was not neglect, it was infrastructure. And perhaps most of all, it's about a world that did not vanish all at once, but slipped away gradually, so quietly that many people did not notice it disappearing until it was already gone. What remains is something that feels less like recent history and more like an alternate timeline, one in which children were simultaneously freer and more vulnerable, less protected and more capable, given a level of autonomy that now seems, depending on your perspective, admirable or completely unhinged. Consider the contrast. A child today might move through the world accompanied by GPS tracking, helmet regulations, allergy protocols, emotional support frameworks, and a car seat engineered with the precision of aerospace technology. A child in 1977 had a banana seat bicycle, a loose understanding of consequences, and a garden hose. And if you place those two children side by side, each would look at the other with the same quiet, unshakable conclusion: how are you still alive?